program, The Interview on The Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch The Interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Today we shall discuss and analyze President Trump's contradictory statements and social media posts. What exactly is he saying to India? Does he really believe he can stop India buying Russian oil? What will he do if it doesn't? Secondly, is the trade deal possible, or in the present circumstances, does it look perhaps unlikely? And then, why is Trump flirting with Pakistan? And has India lost the importance it once used to enjoy? Those are the issues I shall raise today with the US national editor and chief US commentator of the Financial Times, Edward Luce. Mr. Luce joins us live from Washington, D.C. Ed Luce, recently President Trump and his administration have been saying sharply contradictory things about India. On the one hand, the president says he has a special relationship with India and there is nothing to worry about. Yesterday, he rang Prime Minister Modi to wish Mr. Modi for his 75th birthday. On the other hand, the president wants the European Union and G7 countries to impose 100% tariffs on India for buying Russian oil. To us in India, that looks very contradictory. How is it perceived in Washington?
So in Washington, nothing surprises anybody about the tactics. Some of them are sort of bluff. The escalation, the rhetoric, the blowing hot and cold about Trump. That's how he approaches negotiations. It's how he approached negotiations as a property developer in Queens, in Manhattan, and elsewhere in the 1980s. And it's how he approaches trade negotiations in 2025. So on the one hand, nobody's surprised. I mean, they're a little bit alarmed at the bluster that Trump has been showing towards India and towards other friends of the United States. But the lack of geopolitical strategy here is, I think, what most concerns people. Trump's India, the conundrum he's imposed on India is really a facet of his complete lack of interest in the sort of grander bipartisan consensus about China being the main peer competitor. He's just not interested in that. He doesn't view China through a strategic lens. He views it as a commercial competitor, but as a formidable one. And that sort of produces very different consequences for countries like India and others in the region than if you view China as a strategic competitor. And since Trump doesn't, all bets are off. And India is experiencing that. It's, you know, what you might call a very painful, teachable moment that India is going through.
Let me give you another example. Trump has called Modi my very good friend. He did that roughly 5 or 6 days ago. He says, I feel certain that there will be no difficulty in coming to a successful conclusion on a trade deal. But Howard Lutnick and Scott Bessent have made it crystal clear no deal is possible whilst India continues to buy Russian oil. They call India an oil money laundromat for the Kremlin. So which of the voices coming from Washington should we listen to?
It's a very good question to which nobody has yet produced a satisfactory answer. But of course, the decider is Trump. And while Trump believes that this secondary threat, this squeeze on India over Russian oil and gas is the right way to go, then everybody who works for him will echo it. If Trump then abandons that, they will abandon it. Again, I would not see this, even though it is presented, I would not see this as a strategic move. I don't think that Trump particularly cares about whether Russia gets the revenues to fuel its war with Ukraine or not. I think Trump sees it as a lever in which to extract deeper concessions from Modi and present the whatever deal might result, the US-India deal might result from this, as another product of Trump's genius art of the deal. He just sees that as a tool. So what you're to make of, where Trump's real principles lie or where he really wants to end up, I doubt Howard Lutnick knows that. I doubt Scott Bessent knows that. And maybe Trump himself doesn't know that. With Trump on trade and on trade negotiations, as a colleague of mine keeps putting it, nobody knows anything.
In which case, let me ask you this. Are you suggesting that Trump really does believe he can stop India buying Russian oil? Or is it only a lever that he's using to push and prod India? Because the question is this. It would be close to impossible domestically for Mr. Modi to agree and stop buying Russian oil, and it would seriously damage India's relationship with Russia. So this is a demand being made of Mr. Modi that the Indian Prime Minister can only flatly refuse to accept. And yet it's being repeatedly made.
Yes, I think it's bluster. I doubt Trump wants a complete Indian U-turn on this with all the domestic, economic, and political ructions that would ensue from that. I think he thinks it will force Modi to climb down in other areas, whether that be on agricultural imports or on technology, I don't know. But he sees it as a lever. I'd very much sort of go with the first half of the premise of your question.
This also suggests, does it not, Ed Luce, that if India were to refuse to stop buying Russian oil, there wouldn't be a dramatic response from Trump. After all, when I look at the countries that are buying Russian oil and Russian gas, there are several NATO and European countries like Turkey, Hungary, and Slovenia who continue to buy Russian oil and gas. Japan has started as of June and July this year. And America itself imports Russian palladium, uranium hexafluoride, fertilizers, and chemicals. So would I be right in saying if this is a lever to push and prod India on the trade deal, his response may not be dramatic or startling if India refuses to stop buying Russian oil?
As long as he feels he's making progress elsewhere, and not just substantively, but optically. He doesn't just like to win, he likes to be seen to be winning. I mean, look, you mentioned Japan, Karen. I mean, this is America's largest economic partner that is an ally. It's its richest ally is Japan in the world, and has been sort of as close as any two allies over the last 8 decades. The deal that Trump has just imposed upon Japan and the effect, by the way, on Japanese domestic politics, but the humiliating nature of the terms of the US-Japan trade deal, in which Japan promises telephone book numbers of investment in the United States, but to give America 90% of the share of the profits from those investments. I mean, this is a real sort of grinding his foot in their face humiliation. I think that's the kind of deal he likes to get and he likes to brag about. There's no diplomacy here. There's no other game here than Trump using whatever weapons he can see at hand to basically enforce submission and enable him to present himself as the art of the deal maestro. That's it. No concern for the downstream diplomatic knock-on effects of what Trump is doing to America's network, web of relationships around the world, because he does not see the world through a strategic lens. He sees it through this mercantilist, commercial, deal-making lens in which he's the king of the deal making.
Which means the message to India as far as the trade deal is concerned, which, as you know, at the moment is stalled, although Brendan Lynch, the chief negotiator, paid a one-day visit to India yesterday, the message to India is agree to accept American genetically modified corn and soya, find a way of making it possible for us to sell that to you, and also agree to accept American dairy products, overcome your religious or other hesitations, because those are the terms that I insist upon, and I'm going to insist that I get them, because otherwise this threat of the 25% tariff for buying Russian oil will continue until you give way.
Yes, or because Trump is Trump, and because he's capricious. If Modi turns around and does something like endorses his nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize, that act of what I call bringing fruits to the volcano could pacify the volcano for a while. You will have noticed, Karen, that Trump is now in Britain on his second state visit to Britain. He did one in his first term, and now it's an unprecedented second visit. No American president has had two. So what, you might ask? Well, for Trump, this kind of ego massage, this kind of flattery, the pageantry, the pomp, all the superficial stuff you and I would consider to be secondary, is very much in the forefront of Trump's mind and how he sees the world. It gives him status. It puts him at the center of things. It enables him to brag that no other president has had 2 state visits to with the royal family of Britain, etc. This kind of thing has a disproportionate impact. His ego, if you like, his narcissism, is a material factor in bilateral relations with the United States whilst he is president.
I hear what you're saying with specific regard to trade and tariffs, but the danger is that the damage being done to India-America relations seems to go much wider and deeper. For instance, Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, has spoken of reviewing and revising the H-1B visas program. And India, as you know, is the biggest beneficiary of H-1B visas. And the Homeland Security Secretary has said that she's going to restrict student visas to just 4 years. And once again, Indian students are the biggest cohort of foreign students in America. Meanwhile, Trump, as if to rub it in, is talking about admitting 600,000 Chinese students, which is almost triple the number that exists at present. This could have a very damaging impact on person-to-person relations, people-to-people relations between India and America, and many believe that would go deeper and be more damaging than any discord at the government level.
Yeah, you see, I think that's very close to the mark. I mean, I know several Indians who've got children who are going to university here and are being submitted to this extraordinary, before they get their visas, extraordinary social media investigations to see whether they at any point said anything that could be construed as anti-national under this State Department's new, very generous, kind of arbitrary definition of that. So these stories have a much greater impact on these particular families than any sort of global headlines about what the tariff rate might be. This is their personal experience of America. They believe they've made it, to get a place at an Ivy League, for example. And yet now this is being done, this sort of form of consular waterboarding with which the Trump administration specializes. And then you get, as you say, the offer of China tripling its student level in the United States. It's very, very hard to understand whether Trump understands the consequences of this, whether there is an element of sort of performative cruelty that he enjoys, or whether he's just so completely oblivious to the consequences of his actions that people can't bring that to his attention. He's just not got the attention span. very hard for me to tell you what's in Trump's head. And of course, with any leader, with any interlocutor, Xi Jinping, Putin, whoever it might be, you need to guess what's in their head, what they really want, what their motives might be in order to better reach a satisfactory mutual outcome. But with Trump, that is true squared. The people around him, and I cannot emphasize this enough, don't know what he's going to do next.
What I suppose from an Indian point of view compounds the situation is that side by side with the treatment he's meting out to India, he seems to have fallen in love with Pakistan. He's only imposed 19% tariff on Islamabad. His administration considers Pakistan to be a phenomenal partner against counterterrorism. He's invited Field Marshal Munir to lunch. He plans to help Pakistan prospect for oil whilst teasing India that one day India could be buying Pakistan oil. And now, according to reports in Pakistan, he's going to be meeting Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif at the UN next week. Yet in his first presidency, he accused Pakistan of lies and deceit. What do you make of this?
That flattery does get you places. If you'll recall, Sharif recommended Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. You'll also recall that Trump's offspring's crypto vehicle, World Liberty Financial, is getting very favorable preferential treatment in Pakistan, which is presenting itself as a crypto hub. Another facet of how Trump does business is he likes to enrich himself and his family. Personally, he sees no distinction between the public and the private. King Louis the 14th said, "L'État, c'est moi," the state, it's me. Well, for Trump, it's the state is me. So democracies and countries that have slightly more law-based political systems, like India, find it much harder to do that kind of thing. It comes easily to, Persian Gulf states and to Pakistan and others, because there is also there a blurring of the line between what's public and what is private. So it's easier to sort of offer these emoluments and these inducements to Trump. Again, while I'm emphasizing this, the reason why I'm emphasizing this is not to see Trump's Pakistan actions through the lens of geopolitics. Look at it through business. Look at it through ego. Look at it through flattery.
Okay. In these circumstances, how then do you view the appointment of Sergio Go as America's new ambassador to India? There's no doubt he's very close to Trump and has his ear. But on the other hand, he has no diplomatic experience that anyone is aware of, and he has no prior understanding of India. He certainly isn't in the same mold as the great ambassadors America has sent, like John Kenneth Galbraith and Daniel Patrick Moynihan.
He is not. But, you're in good company there. If you consider some of his other ambassadorial appointments, Jared Kushner's father, Charles Kushner, an ex-felon, a felon, an ex-convict, is ambassador to France. He's got a pal from business from way back as ambassador to Britain. He has sent his son's former girlfriend, Kimberly Guilfoyle, to Greece. I mean, this is not your average administration, to be sure. Ambassadorships, some have been for sale, as it were, throughout sort of modern American history, in that big donors for elections tend to get rewarded with certain ambassadorships. But with Trump, it's a whole new level. And look at his sort of chief diplomatic envoy, Steve Witkoff. Steve Witkoff is a New York and now Miami property guy. That's his experience. He's now in charge of, fixing the Gaza, the horrific Gaza situation, the Ukraine war, and goodness knows what else. He's his all-purpose global envoy without a single sort of line in his resume indicating he knows anything about these issues. So India is in good company there.
Let me put to you a second strand of the Gore appointment that is beginning to attract a fair amount of concern in New Delhi. Sergio Go has also been appointed Special Envoy for South and Central Asia. There's a fear in Delhi that this could be the start of an attempt to mediate between India and Pakistan. If you recall, Trump took great pride in claiming that he had mediated and brokered the ceasefire that ended the 4-day war in May. How do you view this apprehension about Sergio Gore?
So it's interesting. I mean, if you go from that notorious call that Prime Minister Modi and President Trump had in mid-June, I think it was June the 17th, in which Modi schooled Trump in India-Pakistan situation, why this brief war had come to an end, and what the rules are in terms of India's principle of non-interference, no third-party involvement in Kashmir. And then you take us up to today, where Trump's calling Modi his great friend and calling him to wish him a happy birthday, of 75th birthday. This is the sort of full gamut of Trump. I don't think that Trump has any sort of particular reason to believe that now is a ripe moment for India to change its long-standing policy on not having third-party involvement. But I see it as another pressure point. Modi has revealed in that June 17th call and before and since India's acute sensitivity to Trump sort of trampling over convention like this, and Trump sees as another way of pulling India's chain, just to soften it up. All is fair in love and property deals, and he approaches these things like a property deal.
So he looks for weaknesses in the people he's dealing with, in the countries he's forging relationships with, and pulls the chain to give himself that extra leverage and advantage.
He does, but we should sort of be, with Trump, there's no perfect pattern or consistency to describe his approach, because it's very different, as you've indicated earlier, to how he's dealing with China, the biggest bilateral question, at least in the minds of everyone else in Washington, but the one that he's treating with most respect and with by far less punitive language and threats than he is with India, for example. And I think that's because Trump loves to win deals, but he really, really doesn't like to lose. And in China, he sees the one actor on the global stage that is punching back, that has just as much leverage over the United States as the United States has over China. And I think that explains why Trump has been so pliable and respectful to Xi Jinping. And again, I will bring you back to my first answer. He doesn't see this through a geopolitical lens, and therefore all bets are off. All the assumptions we held are in suspension at the very least, and maybe much worse.
Let me throw something else into our conversation. Ashley Tellis of the Carnegie Endowment told me that he believes the key problem India faces today vis-a-vis the United States is that it is no longer as important in the eyes of the White House as it used to be when Bush was president, or Obama, or Biden, or even Trump #1. He says this is true whether one looks at India in terms of trade, in terms of the Indo-Pacific or the Quad, or in terms of the wider strategic relationship. Do you think that that's another factor, that India's level of importance has diminished and shrunk, which is why Trump can use whatever leverage he wants? It doesn't matter what the cost will be.
Indeed. And this is why I keep emphasizing that the reason for this is that Trump, unlike all his predecessors, including allegedly Trump 1.0, as Ashley Tellis pointed out, doesn't see China as the peer competitor. It should be mentioned that his Pentagon in this administration is right now reviewing the national defense strategy that he first promulgated in his first administration, and then was carried through and updated by Biden's administration, namely that China and Russia are America's peer competitors, and it's near peer competitors, and it's a great power political world we're living in. Trump doesn't see that as being a challenge. He sees that as being a natural feature of the jungle, that there are big predators. The new national defense tweaks strategic tweaks that are going on is that America is far more focused on its own hemisphere geopolitically. On the Western Hemisphere, it is really a sort of restatement of the Monroe Doctrine, the 19th century American Monroe Doctrine, which said to others, keep out of our backyard. The implication being that other great powers have their own backyard, and we respect them and their backyards. And India is in China's backyard. I mean, this is a very serious sort of moment in terms of geopolitics, and I don't think Trump's going to sort of change the way he sees that, which is first and foremost that relations with the rest of the world are about commerce, and India's a relatively small economy still compared to the Chinas and the Japans, and I don't know what's going to change his perspective on that. I rack my brains to come up with a sort of a Hail Mary, to use an American football term, a Hail Mary maneuver that Modi can pull off to make Trump look at the world through the eyes of his predecessors and through the eyes of the bipartisan consensus in Washington, D.C., which has for at least a quarter of a century wished for and based its strategic goals on India succeeding, India growing, India becoming stronger and more self-confident, the better to be a natural counterbalance to China.
If Trump is now viewing China, if Trump is now viewing China as a regional power that has a right to dominate its own backyard, and as you say, India is very much in China's backyard. They are our northern neighbors. We have a 4,000-kilometer boundary with them. That would be particularly grim news from New Delhi's point of view. It means not only does Trump not see India as a bulwark against Chinese dominance, which he would like in some shape and form to check, but more importantly, he won't necessarily be coming to India's assistance in any potential border, not necessarily conflict, but simply dispute between India and China. All of that would be bad news from Delhi's point of view.
It would be, and I think it's really interesting how India, I mean, I'm not sure whether it's Jaishankar alone or whether it's now become sort of the standard script, talks about a multi-aligned India, which, I sort of hear quite differently to non-aligned. I think the traditional non-aligned position was really a moral stance, first and foremost. I think multi-aligned is a sort of very necessary and quite urgent hedging strategy that India needs to undertake. And I hear talk of, the dragon dancing with the elephant. I'm not sure, how far that's going to take India, but it will at least sort of, it would at least put India's eastern flank under a slightly more predictable. I would imagine that this is what Jaishankar and Modi are hoping to pacify and quell the China threat to some degree, precisely because the United States under Trump cannot be relied upon in the way that, you mentioned John Kenneth Galbraith. John F. Kennedy did come to India's assistance in that first Indo-Chinese war in the early 1960s. You cannot bank on that.
So would I be right in coming to the conclusion that the relationship Trump wants with India is entirely on his own terms? He wants India to fall in line, to accept what he wants as the right relationship, and thereafter it could be smooth sailing. But that falling in line is the essential prerequisite.
Yes, the only sort of quibble I'd have with what you've just outlined is that thereafter things will be stable. Nothing is for keeps with Trump. You get a deal, a few months later he decides he wants another deal or he tears it up. And this is why, I think if you were to try and describe how the whole world is responding to Trump, the varying reactions to what he's unleashed since Liberation Day in early April, and there have been very varying, as we've discussed, China, being one, countries like the UK and the European Union being another, and India having, apparently its own special place in hell in Trump's conduct of trade war. But there have been a ton of bilateral sort of ructions going on around the world in the last 3-4 months. And I don't see any sign that that's going to change. I mean, you might get a deal out of it. You might get a temporary sort of pacification of Trump. But what most of these countries are doing, and I suspect India is like really scratching its head to find a good way of doing, is to build longer term arrangements with others, whilst trying to do what it takes to buy short term peace with Trump, to create the space to hedge, to really escalate the whole hedging and what India now calls multi-aligned approach to the world. That is what most countries are seeking to do. And India really ought to be looking for new markets, new suppliers. It ought to be diversifying aggressively.
Tell me, we're coming to the end of this interview. Is there any constituency in America that's willing to say to Trump, you're making a terrible mistake in the way you're handling India?
Yes, but it depends how you define constituency. I mean, business is in his pocket. He has, made it clear he will target individual businesses, even sort of national champions like Intel, if he feels they're not sufficiently supplicatory to him. He's taken a stake in Intel. He's got NVIDIA, the big AI chips processor, AI chip processor world leader, to agree to give him a share of their revenues if he allows them to sell certain high-end chips to China and other countries. He has interfered, in private business decisions in a way that just isn't seen as American. So ordinarily, you might get a sort of coherent Chamber of Commerce, American business lobby response to an administration that was acting against its interests, which indeed most American businesses believe is happening with India, but not with Trump, because Trump will use those levers we've been discussing, not just bilaterally on the global stage, but domestically against particular companies and particular chief executives. So yes, there are constituencies that don't like this, but they're not speaking up very loudly, because the consequences of opposing Trump, unless you're China or the bond markets, unless you're strong enough to defeat him, the consequences of opposing Trump can be dire. So I'm not sure that those are going to, the ordinary sort of cavalry is going to come to the rescue on this occasion.
Finally, does this mean that the relationship between India and the United States is not going to markedly improve during the remaining 3 years and 4 months of Trump's presidency? We're going to have to wait for it to end before not just improvement, but a stable improvement manifests itself.
I mean, there could be a period of stabilization, but I'm really hesitant to predict. If somebody had outlined to me at the beginning of April what would be the next 4 months of US-India relations, I would have been quite surprised by the degree of vandalism that Trump has been prepared to undertake to what is seen by everybody else and allegedly by his own administration as a key natural ally. The nobody knows anything. I wish I could be sort of more of a soothsayer and a better forecaster. The nobody knows anything mantra is a really good one with Trump.
You've used, however, a phrase that I think will strike a chord with the Indian audience. You described Trump's attitude to India relations as vandalism. I think many in New Delhi will agree with that use of word. Thank you very much for the time you've given me. Thank you very much for your analysis and understanding. Take care. Stay safe.
Always a pleasure, Karan.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? all you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.